Should we go live at 7:05 to give people a couple minutes to get on it?
Uh, People tend to come, and they'll come in later, they'll come in early. I don't think it really matters. We
Should we
usually
go
just
live at
start with
7:05 to give
okay.
people a couple minutes to get on it?
Uh, People tend to come.
Okay.
Each of a night, each of a night, each of a night, each of a night.
Okay. Hello. Good evening, everyone. We're so excited to have you here for H of a Night.
And if you didn't get it from the audio that just played, what of an each of a night it will be, as Meet the Presses Collective is back with a whole lot of new and exciting changes this year that we're excited to share.
And to start, we'd like to address some of these changes that we've made to the collective this year.
For those of you who don't know, this is the 37th anniversary of the BP Nickel Chapbook Award. And as I found on a non-academic article on the internet, which of course is always trustworthy, the number 37 is a number of change and progress. So of course, we've been taking that quite literally here.
We have indeed. This past year, we've brought on 5 new members to our collective. So our collective is now comprised of your hosts here tonight, me, Urjani Swalik,
as well as me, Madeline Rousseau, and Aaron Tucker, Becca Lawler, Gary Barwin, Jacqueline Valencia, Jennifer Lovegrove, Renee Sarjoni Saklakar, Shaylin Schweg, Megan Flockshot, and Tally Veron.
One seismic change that's occurred this year for us is that one of our esteemed founding members, Paul Dutton, has stepped down as a member of Meet the Presses. We can't say enough how grateful we are for Paul for everything he's done over the years. We'd like to invite Eric Schmaltz, intermediate artist, poet, scholar, and editor with a focus on contemporary and 20th century Canadian avant-garde literature and art, to say a few words about him.
That I join you by, well, video to celebrate the remarkable achievements of the multi-talented poet, fictioneer, essayist, and musician Paul Dutton. Paul's unwavering dedication to the Meet the Presses collective over the years and his profound impact on the literary community merit our deepest recognition and gratitude, and I mean that truly. Many of you are likely familiar with Paul's illustrious career as a member of the renowned performance poetry ensemble The Four Horsemen, as well as a member of the free improv band CCMC. He has toured extensively ensemble and solo across Canada, Europe, the United States, and South America, performing at music and literary festivals, in concert halls, galleries, theaters, clubs, universities, and schools. Over the years, Paul really has been an international ambassador for transgressive creative traditions that continue to change and evolve today. Paul's literary prowess, however, extends well beyond the stage. With many books to his name, his most recent is Sonos and Tactics, selected in New Poetry, which was expertly edited by fellow Meet the Press's collective member Gary Barwin. On his work, Gary says that Paul is a profoundly aware writer, finely attuned to the possibilities of poetry. And I would add to that Paul is finely attuned to the possibilities created by a robust small press literary culture. Paul doesn't only impress by his skillful ability to transgress literary norms, but also by his unwavering commitment to community and the preservation of the small press tradition. As a founding member of Underwitch in 1979, Paul championed the publication of inimitable works with an unconventional focus. In his own words, Underwitch is characterized by its unorthodox content, unorthodox publication, efforts to economize low print runs, and individual initiative. Many of you have likely encountered him cap on head, slinging Underwitch editions at the annual Meet the Presses market. Today, Paul remains the sole custodian of Underwitch's invaluable back catalog, and I think this is a testament to his dedication to the cause. My personal connection with Paul began to form in earnest about 10 years ago, and it developed during my tenure as a Meet the Press's collective member from 2013 to 2018. And though I left the collective 5 years ago, I still regularly visit Paul in his backyard to share a bottle of Meiomi and cheese boards that are just so good. I've learned about a lot of things from Paul over the years, and among those things is good cheese. Really, though, I first got to know Paul as a community member committed to playing his part in upholding Toronto's small press literary scene. His efforts in sustaining this tradition were admirable, and quite honestly, I found them inspiring. During my time with Meet the Presses, there were moments when we might have been, a little bit sluggish as a group. And Paul was always the first to call us into action. He was the first to contribute to discussion, the first to post to PB Works, and the first to pick up the phone to call me late at night when there was something pressing to discuss. And I really appreciated that about Paul. His devotion extended far beyond the surface of Meet the Presses. He cared deeply about its narrative and legacy, recognizing its role as a cornerstone of Toronto's literary community, and as a nurturing ground for literature as well. Today, I'm heartened to witness the Meet the Presses collective in robust health with a dedicated membership working behind the scenes. Thank you to you all. Throughout its history, Meet the Presses has been fortunate to have exceptional individuals contributing to the cause, and Paul undeniably ranks among those who made the most substantial impact. His unwavering dedication ensured that the collective not only survived, but that it also thrived. So please, let's raise a glass of steam whistle or cellar-chilled old speckled hen or port or red wine or Zevia, and toast to Paul. Thank you, Paul, for your years of service. The community owes you one.
Thank you, Eric. And Paul, if you're listening, thank you for being so welcoming to those of us who are new this year and for everything you've done for the Canadian literary scene.
Especially thank you to your dedication you've put towards Meet the Presses, the Indie Lit Market, and the BP Chapbook Nickel Award over the years.
As a collective, we're truly sad to see Paul go, but we wish you the best of luck with everything ahead of you. Reflecting on the work that Paul has done, I would like to
Sorry, we were on mute there for a second. We're back now.
As a collective, we're truly sad to see Paul go, but we wish you the best of luck with everything ahead of you. Reflecting on the work that Paul has done, I would like to emphasize how truly incredible his legacy and the legacy of all of the founding members of Meet the Presses is.
As a nonprofit, Meet the Presses wouldn't be what it is today without our many volunteers who have come and gone over its lifetime, whether it's through managing award submissions, crafting social media content, reaching out to jurors, organizing physical spaces for events like the Indie Lit Market, or our crucial but often overlooked tech support. These outstanding folks are the ones who make it happen.
And if you'd like to help support Meet the Presses with administrative costs, future Indie Lit Markets, the BP Nickel Chapbook Award, and all the work we do as a collective supporting the Canadian independent literary industry, then please consider taking a short visit to our PayPal at meetthepresses.wordpress.com, where you can make a donation to keep the Meet the Presses moving, shaking, and making changes.
But thank you all for coming out tonight. Sit back and get ready for an H of a night. We'll soon be announcing the finalists for this year's BP Chapbook Award, as well as, probably what I'm most looking forward to, listening to some readings from the finalists themselves.
We'll also be giving some insight on what the indie lit market will look like this year, and give you an H of a look at the relationship between historical and contemporary chapbooks from guest speaker Gillian Dunks.
Before that, Meet the Presses, which has historically operated out of Toronto, would like to collectively acknowledge their presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaronto is located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat, the Métis, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Toronto remains home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples today. This territory is also covered by the Dish with One Spoon Treaty and the Two Row Wampum Treaty, which requires all those who use the land to do so responsibly, to care for the land and share it peaceably. As this is a virtual event, and many of you may be calling in from across the continent, we invite you to take a moment to acknowledge the lands you inhabit and the many Indigenous peoples who have called those lands home since time immemorial. Whether we're writers, publishers, readers, or dreamers, we are all stewards of storytelling. It is our responsibility to acknowledge the past, no matter how uncomfortable, in order to be able to shape the future into one that is better than what came before. Madeline, you are muted.
What is a virtual event without our technical difficulties, right? My apologies, everyone. With all of this being said, and after reflecting upon what was of Meet the Presses, our presence as Meet the Presses, and what we are currently, we'd like to take this opportunity to also reflect on historical and contemporary chapbooks, and we invite Gillian Dunks to share some thoughts. Gillian Dunks is Archives Arrangement and Description Librarian at McMaster University and a scholar with particular interest in the history of chapbooks. Take it away, Gillian.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Gillian Dunks, and I'm an archivist working in McMaster's Special Collections Department. Today, I'm going to give you a version of a conference paper I presented earlier this year entitled Desire I Want to Turn Into You, Reflections on Nostalgia in Contemporary Canadian Chapbooks. A question which animates my research is, how are chapbooks defined over time, and to what extent do characteristics of older formats exert an influence on the newer? Eli McLaren writes of two understandings of the word: the modern definition, in which chapbooks are small books written and designed to artistic standards, printed by an author, often at personal expense, bound cheaply, and produced outside of the mainstream commercial book trade; and the older definition dating to the 19th century, which denoted the cheap popular literature of a prior age, pamphlets containing ballads or tales illustrated with stock woodcuts, which were sold cheaply by peddlers or chapmen. What are the implications of calling a 21st century publication a chapbook? What desires and anxieties are revealed by the term? What does the term mean in Canada, given the country's colonial context? I explore these questions through examination of the print culture surrounding a chapbook series produced in the Southern Ontario region from the late 1980s to present, Chapbooks from Gary Barwin's Seraph of Nottingham Press. One feature these modern Canadian chapbooks and their predecessors share is nostalgia, manifesting in their content, production, and circulation. Linda Hutchins' work on nostalgia, irony, and the postmodern posits that nostalgia is a desire for an idealized past, which is a response to dissatisfaction with the present. The chapbooks discussed today emerge from explicitly anti-commercial and poetically experimental contexts. Their nostalgia is peculiar and ironic. Hutchin writes that ironic nostalgia performs a double function. It acknowledges the power of nostalgia, and it simultaneously undercuts it, or more precisely, It situates it as part of the present moment. Nostalgia also has a political dimension in its evocation of an idealized past. In the context of Anglo-Canadian settler society, this nostalgia may be for colonial era Britain or for the life ways of a pre-machine era folk age. The chapbook is an ideal format through which to explore these political dimensions of nostalgia, as it has a long history of emerging at moments of profound sociopolitical transformation to articulate a relationship to a past time. When considering the role that nostalgia plays in contemporary English language chapbooks, we must consider what contemporary chapbooks are nostalgic for. Their oldest referent is the street literature of the pre-industrial era, particularly in Britain. Street literature is a tradition which begins in the 15th century. Leslie Shepard, a historian of street literature, writes of inexpensive ballad sheets, pamphlets, and ephemera produced for the semi-literate working classes, which provided information on important political events and entertainment. Chapbooks were part of this tradition. And you can see some examples of street literature from the McMaster collections in this image. John Symonds defines chapbooks as a single sheet of paper printed on both sides and then folded so as to make a book of 12 leaves or 24 pages. Chapbooks were sold unopened, often included one or more woodcuts or wood engravings, and were fragile and printed on poor quality paper. We can add to this definition information about the chapbook's distribution and content. Chapbooks retold old fairy tales, related stories of ancient battles, rehashed superstitions and riddles, contained information about divination, or included abridged versions of longer works like novels. They were predominantly distributed by chapmen or itinerant peddlers who would sell them to individuals. A common price was 1 penny. Purchasers would then cut the chapbook pages and hand-stitch the booklet, and you can see an example of that hand-stitching here. For reference, here's a good example of the format from McMaster's collections. The History of Valentine and Orson was printed in 1790 by a regional printer, Charles Sutton. Valentine and Orson is a medieval romance of French origin. It is part of the Carolingian cycle, or one of the 3 great Western story cycles repeated in medieval European literature. The story was hugely popular in England, and it continued to be printed from the 15th century well into the 18th. John Symonds writes that chapbooks like these preserve Middle English romances whose history can actually be traced back to the 13th century, if not further. These stories are cultural through lines during periods of tremendous socio-political upheaval. The Arthurian legends are similarly very popular in chapbooks of this era. It is worth noting that many of the 19th and 20th century chapbook producers who popularized the term chapbook and intentionally evoked the chapbooks of the pre-industrial age in their book design kind of elided the realities of British book publication from the 16th to 17th centuries. During this time, again, the time period when chapbooks really proliferated, the Stationers' Company held a monopoly over printing in England and Wales. This was a powerful guild that controlled entry to the printing trade, regulated wages and conditions of employment, and protected printers' rights to produce titles. The stationers ensured that printing was concentrated in London until the late 18th century. Street literature was, in other words, very big business. Chapbooks were commercial publications at this time, and they were made with the most current technology of their era, and they were profitable for the small cartel of London-based printers who produced them. Unlike 16th or 17th century British chapbooks, contemporary Canadian poetry chapbooks are not, and never have been, big business. As Dobson and Cambarelli have recently pointed out, the Canada Council for the Arts continues to underwrite many of the culture industries, particularly literary production. Most publishers could not operate without the grants they receive from the Canada Council, yet the Council continues to be motivated by literary nationalism. Select writers garner the bulk of the market's attention, while the works of other writers languish. These divides can and should be attributed to issues of race, class, sex, and gender. Genre also does matter. Nonfiction, for example, sells very well in Canada, while poetry does not. In a recent survey of contemporary Canadian poets, Eli McLaren reported that those surveyed made less than 2% of their household incomes from commercial sources. The same study reports the president of House of Anansi as saying, "Publishing a new book of poetry is always a clear financial loss." Gary Barwin's Seraph of Nottingham Press emerges in this context. The chapbooks from it are typical of the small press format in Canada. Small self-published editions with a preference for experimental poetry and an anti-commercial bent. Gary Barwin began his small press in the 1980s. He described making chapbooks as an entry point for participating in events like Meet the Presses. The materiality of the printing process was important for him and other chapbook producers. They could rubber stamp, sew bindings, and make copies of their work. Seraph of Nottingham was most active from the 1980s to 1990s, but it still produces a small number of chapbooks at present. Barwin tended to produce between 50 to 100 copies in a print run. A typical chapbook would be created using desktop publishing software. In the 80s, Barwin would then use a dot matrix printer for his manuscripts. He would manually cut out each page of text and would impose it using Scotch tape into his final printing order. The final volume, always a folio, would be photocopied and fastened with staples. This process is still followed by many contemporary producers of chapbooks, as I've discovered in some of my interviews. Seraph of Nottingham occasionally published works from other writers. In these instances, Barwin engaged in no formalities such as publishing contracts. In terms of distribution, Barwin uses the phrase gift economy to describe his approach. Chapbooks were given out for free at readings or were exchanged via mail with other creators. Barwin did occasionally sell books at book fairs or at readings, but his approach to pricing was playful. He once sold his chapbooks by weight. In another instance, he incorporated an actual penny into the chapbook itself. The components of pre-industrial chapbook print culture, which the Seraph of Nottingham chapbooks recalls, are the distribution networks and the community orientation, as well as their price. The name of Barwin's press, Seraph of Nottingham, clearly situates the project in the folkloric Britain of Robin Hood. Barwin distributes his chapbooks at readings and markets, just as early chapbooks would have been distributed by chapmen at fairs and in village squares. Barwin's chapbooks were priced anywhere from 1 penny to $2, just as early chapbooks would have retailed at 1 penny. However, Barwin's chapbooks and the pre-industrial chapbooks have little else in common. Early chapbooks were highly commercialized publications, and as historians of street literature remind us, the price of 1 penny, even in the 18th century, would have been very costly for an average laborer. Early chapbooks were produced using the means of mass production available at the time, the hand press. Contemporary chapbooks are often produced in intentionally slow and cumbersome ways. Barwin's intentional evocation of a pre-industrial past is not a deliberate misunderstanding of these differences. Rather, it's an expression of longing for a past which has never existed, a past free of grueling market realities and dehumanizing modes of production. Even as the emotional pull of this fantasy is acknowledged, it is undercut by irony. King Arthur Was a Mountie is an excellent example of the double work that ironized nostalgia performs in a chapbook. Created in 1987, the chapbook contains a free verse poem which juxtaposes Arthurian folklore to significant figures of Canadian and Métis national identity. King Arthur was Louis Riel. King Arthur was a Mountie, the opening stanza proclaims. The Mountie is a prominent symbol in the imaginal of Canadian settlers. He is law and order, the good guy protecting the frontier. To racialized communities and Indigenous communities, the Mountie probably signifies something entirely different, perhaps violent enforcement of an imposed colonial order. Louis Riel and the Red River community are significant to the Métis Nation. Louis Riel is an advocate for Métis sovereignty and self-determination. The poem concludes, "Camelot is not a phallic symbol, it is a place of pure joy. Camelot is the place where I learned the meaning of the word Canada." Camelot is imagined, just as Canada is. Canada is a construct of settler consciousness, which is undergirded by violence against Indigenous peoples and theft of their land. The poem's sputtering attempts at invoking a Canadian folklore which draws from the matter of Britain highlights the futility of nationalistic storytelling in the context of colonialism. This desire is threaded through the Canadian arts, and its potency is acknowledged in the poem. Camelot is the place of pure joy. Even in the matter of Britain, though, Camelot is eventually destroyed. The place of pure joy is nowhere. To fetishize a fantasy of the past is to ignore a present which urgently demands our attention. In terms of format, the chapbook is a 12-page folio measuring 14 by 11 centimeters. The cover is printed on red cardstock. Barwin's dot matrix printer is evident. By his account, the cover image, a play on the sword in stone legend, was created by physically combining a printed out graphic of a sword with a printed out graphic of a telephone and photocopying the two together to create a cohesive image. Put simply, this is a funny item. Though the chapbook's content holds up difficult realities for our contemplation, it does so in an intentionally antiquated format with a dated legendarium from another country to remind us of what Hutchin terms the risks and lures of nostalgia. It desires, and it desires not to desire. The chapbook format, so often a vehicle for artists expressing dissatisfaction with the present moment, is ideal for exploring these entanglements. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jillian. It's amazing to reflect on the history of chapbooks and how much they have changed over the years. And speaking of change, I think this is a good time to reflect on one of the major changes that Meet the Presses has made this year. Our indie lit market, which for years has been a staple of the independent Toronto literary scene, has changed locations.
As you may have seen from our social media, Meet the Presses has partnered up with the Ampersand Review and Sheridan College this year to bring the indie lit market to Mississauga for the first time.
So mark your calendars, because on Saturday, November 4th, the Indie Lit Market will be at Sheridan's Hazel McKellian campus in the B building.
As many of the new collective members are Sheridan students and alumni, we're very excited to show you our campus. And for those of you in Toronto, don't worry, it's easily accessible by public transit.
There are a number of buses that go from Union and Kipling Station to the Mississauga City Center Transit Terminal, which is only a 3-minute walk from campus. But also keep an eye on our social media for more transit tips.
All in all, we're excited to be back in person for this year's Indie Lit Market, but we're equally as excited to announce the winner of this year's BP Nicol Award at the market. Speaking of which, I think this is the perfect opportunity to introduce this year's finalists of the award.
For those of you who might be new to Meet the Presses or the Canadian chapbook scene, the BP Nicol Chapbook Award recognizes excellence in Canadian poetry in English, published in chapbook form within Canada. The award celebrates the work and life of BP Nicol, a preeminent Canadian poet who devoted his career to expanding the possibilities of language, creating visual and sound poetry within and in addition to his numerous books and countless chapbooks. Nicol was a mentor to many writers and an inspiring community builder. He was an advocate for poetry in general and a champion of small press publishing in particular.
He said, "Supporting small press is supporting literature on the cutting edge. Small press is the guardian of literary culture and free speech, and we at Meet the Presses couldn't agree more."
Towards the end of his life, Nicol co-funded with Philip McKenna and the Phoenix Foundation a Poetry Chapbook Award, which, after Nicol's passing, was renamed in his honor and has continued under the aegis first of the Phoenix Foundation and currently of Meet the Presses.
The prize is awarded to a poetry chapbook judged to be the best submitted. The author receives $4,000 and the publisher receives $500. Awarded continuously since 1986, the BP Nicol Chapbook Award is announced at our annual Indie Literary Market.
The $4,000 prize has been generously donated by an anonymous donor. The $500 prize has been generously provided by Carl Jurgens and Michael Dean. This year, there was also an anonymous donation sent in support of the judges, which allowed us to provide them with an honorarium. Thank you to the donors for their continued support of independent Canadian literature. Before we announce the winners, let's take a moment to commend these generous donors for their support.
We'd now like to invite one of our judges, Alice Burdick, to introduce the finalists of this year's award. Alice, if you will.
Hi, I'm Alice Burdick, and I'm talking to you here from Mahone Bay, Nova Scotia. I had the distinct pleasure of reading the submissions for the 2023 BP Nicol Chapbook Award alongside the venerable Betsy Warland. And it was quite a delightful experience. There were just so many incredible books, just incredible submissions, and it's never easy figuring out who's going to be who's going to be winning these prizes, but it was a pleasure to read the submissions, certainly. So now I'm going to announce the shortlist for the 2023 BP Nicol Chapbook Award. And it is in alphabetical order by the author's name. The first on the list is Glass Language Untitled Exaltation and Excerpt, which is by Jason Christie. It is Light Years by Laboni Islam, and that comes from Baseline Press. Next we have The Lake by James Lindsay, and that comes from Knife Fork Book. Third State of Being by Cassidy McFadzean comes through to us through Gasbro Press. And the last book on the short list is I Need Not Be Good by Kitchen McCown, and that is from Rahila's Ghost Press. So congratulations to everybody who was on the short list, and many thanks to everybody who submitted and all the presses doing their fine work across the country. Thanks so much.
Congratulations to the finalists. We look forward to announcing the winner of the 2023 BP Nicol Chapbook Award at the upcoming Indie Lit Market on November 4th.
And another incredibly huge thank you to our judges, Betsy Warland and Alice Burdick, for their support this year. If you don't know them, Betsy Warland is the author of 14 books of creative nonfiction, memoir, and poetry, and a longtime organizer, mentor, and supporter of small presses and writers across Canada.
And Alice Burdick is the author of many chapbooks, pamphlets, folios, and 4 full-length poetry collections. Deportment, a book of selected poetry, came out in 2018 from Wilfrid Laurier University Press. We are incredibly grateful for this year's judges for their time and generous care in reading all of these terrific submissions.
Now, let's take a listen to our incredible finalists as they share excerpts of their work.
Hello, my name is Laboni Islam, and it is an honor to be shortlisted for this award. I will be reading from my chapbook Light Years, published by Baseline Press. Before reading each poem aloud, I will describe the poem's appearance on the page. The first poem is called Lunar Landing 1966, and it has long lines that go down the length of the page in pairs, with the exception of one line that appears on its own, and this is the line that contains the word vanishing. Lunar Landing 1966, East Pakistan. Ablutions done, 5 children flung rugs onto the floor. 10 knees pressed craters into velvet pile, plush like the humid day descending. The moon was rising in another room, where my grandfather turned the dial on a newfangled television. He wore his hair parted like his country, strands falling to one side or another according to inclination and where the comb went through. Dragging their dusty tails, 5 children came like comets, stood blinking like stars. My mother's memories are bright crescents, waxing and waning, orbiting a center that's spinning on its axis. Would her father have been alive? A probe had landed, star-spangled on the moon, softly in the ocean of storms. For hours it transmitted slow, gray pictures from space. The rocks, the footpad, the tripod's shadow. People applauded aluminum tubing as an antenna. With a bug's sensitivity tossed data across the 400,000 kilometer synaptic gap to Earth. Signals received, broadcast. My mother tucks a silver hair behind her ear. She says they should have been teenagers when the spacecraft landed, that it was star-spangled, not the hammer, the sickle, and the star. If children, then no television, but the television was there, the moon in it, and her father's face full, but vanishing through phases. I have seen the same side of her my whole life, the side with the storms astronomers say may be scars from her early history, a cataclysmic impact. My mother assembles frames into a horizon called Father. The moon reflects the light of 4 sons, 1 daughter. The second poem is called Counting, and this poem has short lines that go down the length of the page, mostly in pairs with the occasional single line. Counting. Sister, in lunar years, we are older. Between high and low tide, the moon tugs water, its turbulence smoothing us as sea glass. How many times have we turned ourselves over and over, felt sand falling through? Geese flock home, and we are thinking about time, about meridians made prime. Lightning scorches sky, expanding air like a lung that seeks its first shape. Have we been honest with ourselves? Questions fork brightly through our bodies, and we count seconds till the clap. And this third and final poem is called First Shakespeare Class 911. It is a poem for 2 voices, and it goes down the length of the page in 2 columns. On the left, the thoughts of the student sitting in class, and on the right, the voice of the professor taking attendance alphabetically. There are a few italicized lines, and these are lines from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, which you may recognize. I will read for both voices and pause to do my best to indicate where the voice shifts. First Shakespeare Class 911. I stare at the syllabus while the professor calls names alphabetically. A. We will study comedies, histories, tragedies. B. Today was tragedy, smoke and flame, a million girders collapsing inside and outside bodies. C. Not any form of faith my father taught me. Quietly upon carpet, the 99 names of God. D. We will learn to scan lines for stressed beats, where breath falls, long and heavy. E. In Romeo and Juliet, I too will ask, what's in a name? And consider the predicament of roses. F. Years ago, from backyard roses emerged a bee. It stung and G. A red welt bloomed, but I have no perennial fear of roses. I love my name, yet my name, dear saint, is hateful to myself because it is an enemy to thee. Islam? Every face a startled mirror where I see myself distorted. Islam? What tongue shall smooth thy name? Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Cassidy McFadden and I'm very honored to be a finalist for the BP Nickel Chapbook Award. I want to express my gratitude to the Meet the Presses collective as well as to the jury. It really means a lot to have these poems read by two poets that I admire so much. In particular, reading Betsy Warland's Bloodroot was really important to the early stages of working on this chapbook, so it means a lot. This is Hafez, the toy poodle, who will be hanging out as I read some poems. So the chapbook is third state of being, put out by Gasbro Press, so thank you to Andrew Steves as well. I wrote the chapbook after my mom passed away in 2020, and the book is a crown of sonnets, so the last line of each poem is the first line of the next poem, and they all sort of come together in the final poem. I'm not going to read the whole suite of sonnets, but I'll read a few just to give you an idea. The way loss ricochets through memory, altering every moment that preceded, those left behind forever changed by it, with renewed engagement tending ever loyally to the earth and its labors, like caretakers in the palace gardens. All I feel is detachment from my surroundings, lost in the labyrinth and its hedges. Did those circumstances truly occur between us, or were they part of a shared hallucination? That when I close my eyes, you're still visible. I felt the earth altered when you left it, and all of possibility replaced with inertia, the strings of gravity suddenly detached. The strings of gravity suddenly detached, as if emptiness cast over every interaction, a lack that cannot be replicated or restored but hangs limply, just out of reach. Now that you've left, it's as if nothing in childhood was ever real, or if life did occur as imagined, after a certain moment it slipped away, the train on the track released its brakes. It leaves a feeling of falseness in its stead, a doll in the crib to replace the crying baby, all the toys once gifted sealed in a chest, the reverberations of your hopes for me, realized or discarded, ran through my body like an electric charge and its aftershocks. Like an electric charge and its aftershocks, the way you filled in the blanks of memory, even when you weren't present in their occurrence, supplying names and dates for my retelling. An uncanny ability, you reveled in stories. You were omniscient observer to my life, witness with a slated interest, and in your absence, there is no one to report failures and successes. Without you, life rings the same note flatly. There is nothing to bring rise to crescendo or fall to diminuendo, but with dullness merely presses on. And once robbed of your presence, how can I be certain moments occurred as I recall, whether all that unfolded wasn't fraudulent? Whether all that unfolded wasn't fraudulent. Uncertain I'm the same person in the pictures. I seem to have been altered on the molecular level. Worse, I'm inattentive to this shift, a traitor to myself, like a chicken that doesn't realize it's been beheaded, but keeps flapping on for a few minutes longer, unwilling to accept its new condition before collapsing in the dirt and the bed straw. If I concentrate hard enough, is it possible to live in a palace of memory I can build inside my head? Do I remember our last time walking together, the last instance I allowed you to reach out, to hold my hand, without fear of shirking it, and the moment I did, rejecting your touch. So I think I'll end there, but thank you so much again. Congratulations to the other finalists, and say bye from Hafez and me. Bye.
Hello. I wrote the poems in this chapbook, Glass Language, Untitled Exaltation, during a period of years where my language and memory were shattered by sleep deprivation. In order to keep myself connected to poetry, I started writing in a file about our life with young kids. I didn't think much about what I was writing. The point was to do it. I amassed a large repository of content, but I stopped adding to it as life found its new level. While reflecting on how hard it was to remember anything as a result of years of disrupted sleep, I realized what I had in the original file was literally those memories stored on my computer. I wondered if I could treat that original material with processes that would be similar to what was happening to my mind during sleep deprivation. To replicate some of the effects of memory loss and the difficulty of thinking, I wrote Python scripts that cut up, recombined, and selected random lines from that source material. The results were a mess and not very good, but I edited them down to try to make sense of the jumble that had once been rational. Much like how memories are stories, how we gloss over the messy, difficult, or impossible to recall details, how we invent the connecting pieces to attribute to our memory a sense of completeness, I worked on the poems to attempt to let them become something new, an active remembering. Memory, as I now think of it, is not entirely an act of recall with varying degrees of fidelity, but also an act of creation. We look at the glossy or glossless images of our past and we glue them together into a whole new collage. A small song for Andrea. If I struggle to arrive like a union of treated pianos, then I'll bind to that sound some vitamin D and toast. If I'm a hot Monday wavering, then look, what a way to start writing without myself. If I'm somewhat public in the public's mind, I'll listen. If your body says walls are a problem, where forests mean otherwise than being, is it a fine memory itself becoming afraid to village? Either way, if I've held you close enough in that moment when the aesthetic clicks, then I'm expansive in the way I've used the word relentless to describe reading. Quiet mornings in letters or a tantrum, a roundabout or in a round, a resounding ballad of dissonances plays, and a coffee machine beeps, sound in a box. Emmett and Miles woke before I left at 4 a.m. to cry out, held in that moment with them, in that moment with you, in the dark, in the moonlight and stars, asleep. Is there any coffee? Building blocks scatter at dawn, timpani rolls at dawn amidst the mess. A toddler is triumphant in his nature, and a season of illness has left us wanting, exhausted and aching, wanting, exhausted and aching, wanting for warmer weather and better health, warmer weather and better health, warmer weather, better health, trudging into spring, falling forward, and calling it progress, tempered at least by joy. The work is as it was, not as it is, as it was, not as it was, ever, not ever. Poetry, but a thing, poetry but a thing of the world, a necessity and nothing more. A line. Rotting timber, our brains and silting muck, our riverbeds and beds and forests, our undeniable forests, and it's a horrifying time to be alive. If our eyes and ears are to be believed, our hearts and lungs, My sons and repeat, my sons euphoric and repeat, my sons repeat, my sons euphoric as we never knew, as we never knew before, we never knew before, exhausted and full of life, expanded beyond full, expanded beyond life, expanded beyond what life, expanded beyond life, expanded beyond what we ever thought possible, what we ever thought possible, and love, ever, what we ever thought possible, and what, melting into whatever, snow into rain, now, and I know, and I melt. No mountain alone with the self, no self alone in the mountains, no warmth without everyone, no self alone with a mountain, no mountain alone with the self, a self, no self alone in the mountains without everyone's warmth, no warmth without everyone, no self alone in the mountain. Pale blue wind clouds the eyes. My children, Emmett and Miles, walking toward us, toward evening together, hand in hand, breath after breath, mulch, brush, loam from leaf. Boards creak under their feet, ideas plucked from their words. I fidget, looking for a flash against metal, a high note keening on wind. A field of noise expands, a drone unwound along a line of my kids together, a long sound crying high, a high note held long, a song cycle goes round, a decay rate slowing, a drone undone against time, speech without text. Ash thrown skyward pulls wood through fire into a bare idea of wood, scent, heat, noise, ash, sent aloft like music. A small song for our children. If my life becomes a wall of bees and smashed pianos, then know that our voices cut through the noise, and if several paths flood, then we'll build a boat together. If, my children, you wonder at the weight of everything, then know you brought lightness to our world. You are a bright light in the beautiful, expansive darkness. If you find smooth pebbles along the shore of a river, know that your mother and father were there before you, holding them in our hands as we hold you. If the forest suddenly becomes a series of trees, if a beach is a pile of grains, if infinitesimal hitches catch your thoughts, then look to us and we will be smiling. Thank you.
It's so gay to love the country. It's so gay to grieve in the summertime. Goodbye to sourdough body and long hair. I hunched over recovery and prayed riddance to selfishness and fear, and you held my face, smelling of clay and blueberries and beer. It's so gay to fall in love and attend. In that rural healing, that glowing, I touched some tender place on you, and the morning sunbeam pried me open. You touched my face, whispered, "My sweet boy." You had to get up and make everyone breakfast, and I to tend the garden and call my girlfriend. I went down to the rope swing by the lake and reintroduced myself with new words, high on gay love and tremoring hands. In the country, it is okay to be neither. I don't understand why you would want to be a boy. It's fine, as long as you don't look too much like one. It's so gay to fall out of love on the phone. In the city, I have no windows. Took an Uber down to the village and the driver said, 2 women together is disgusting. When I complained, Uber gave me $5. I find myself tremoring for a transness that isn't skinny, white, and seemly, but rather butch as wind in the trees, butch as golden hours swim, butch as soft and fearless morning. Outbreaks. I search for God, but the sun is a penny. Looper moths form halos beneath every street lamp. Summer's ghostly curtains. Check the weather. Haze. I search for God, but the moon is gone. I search for comfort, and the eels come. They cross my meadow every twilight up to 7 feet in length, traversing mountain napes with open, eager mouths. The fires heaved them from the rivers. Now they curve themselves along the precipice of life toward black oceans. Haunted yellow eyes. Looper moths become a gentle cloud. I become an eel, then rethink it. I cough, reveal a wet moth, some gray little heart. It's all hazy now. Pale as sun-bleached wood, I go forth. In a slant of moonlight, I search for comfort. The neon 24-hour fried chicken sign gleams behind the pines. I crawl in the moss. It is easy to find God. She is a cluster of eels beneath my palms. I ask of her, am I doing any of this life right? And she, softly with her many mouths, says nothing. Cancer poem. Love is a lunar contract. Intimacy is shucking a crustaceous thing. 2 crabs holding pincers beneath some damp crag. A tidal pool love shack for 2 little wet things fucking on the floor of an apartment we do not rent. Says one small crab, I love your big strong hands. Honey, says the other, and boards the early seaplane. Crabs do not hold pincers the way we hold hands. Cancers love home and feeling emotions. I enter a party and a woman asks my sign. When I tell her, she scoffs in after-school special and walks away. Cancers love crying. A sea goat friend squeezes my hand across the table. I offer them my kidney. What a cancer thing to do. The moon for a healed body. A breath of island. Cancers are the most codependent sign. My mother gives me 2 cancer magnets. 1, an angry crab pinching a small fish. 2, the same crab lifting cartoon hearts into the air. I ask that woman at the party what her problem is. She says, what? You gonna cry? I sport a vengeful and foamy mouth. I imagine a healthy kidney, which is the next right thing. I watch young boys tear the legs off crabs and fling them into the sea. With a sweep of a great oceanic wing, I gather them in a pleasant armful. Honey, says one crab to another, what time is it? A forever bath time. We swell into a lift, your body fresh from the pool, my crabful cradle of sweet and brackish lullaby, and a wave rolls us down to the sound of meteors and other crashing things. I need not be good. The universe asks me to unbecome. I need not wring sorrow from my body. My brother writes me a letter from rehab in the desert. He writes that a camp dog got bit by a rattlesnake. We used to climb trees so high that our legs shook. When he left, the trees turned to shadows and life unbecame. Just yesterday, I wrote a reminder on my fridge to jump into the ocean with Kyla on Sunday. My pen dried after jump in, and now jump in menaces me all over my apartment. Jump in dinner, jump in gossip girl. My brother sold our Xbox for heroin and left through a door into the mountains. Once, someone I was in love with had written take everything on her front door, so I did too. On my bedroom door, on my mirror, take everything. I bound my breast for the first time. I ate a bagel. I took what I could. And I need not be good to listen to Patsy Cline on the porch in July, to listen to the wind on the black water. My brother builds a fire with sticks and rocks, somewhere that is not here. I accept such longings, and with them, the great mystery that is survival. The door into the mountains opens, and my thirsty mouth fills with snow. Thank you so much.
Hello. My name is James Lindsay. I am the author of The Lake, published by Knife Fork Book, as well as the other poetry collections are Inland Sea, Double Self-Portrait, and Only Insistence. I'd like to thank the Meet the Presses Collective and the judges. This is quite an honor. I'm going to read a bit from this chapbook, but before I do that, I'd like to talk a little bit about the book that inspired it, which is by Heather Christel, a poet and essayist. This is her collection of essays called The Crying Book. Her first book of poetry, The Trees, absolutely incredible. You should definitely read that. But in here, she was writing about writing poetry and writing about things indirectly. And I found she used a quote from Tony Toast, which is where I found the quote that opens this book and becomes a refrain for the rest of the poem itself. I don't know how to talk about my biological father, so instead I'm going to describe the lake. It's blue with swans. And I've never seen the other side, but even from here, now, it's obvious that something has caught fire. Smoke so bold, it appears as sky accusing gravity of lying, as being pointed at by a body larger than yourself, but still familiar. The way it made the swans deny the unimaginable whim fleeing from fire, refusing to know the way of life is personal, touching one another like trees, the trees in the forest that enfolds the lake, the swans, where smoke laid blame. And I don't know how to talk about my biological father, so instead I'm going to describe how eventually the smoke met precipitation. Atmosphere, so severe, rain fled from clap bracketing clap. Spark dividing spark, making paranoid secret language fantasies far from the side where suns are born firstly, stunted by trying to be by water. I don't know how to talk about my biological father, so instead I'm going to try to describe the lake. Like any ancient and enigmatic body of water, it's full of things, collapsed algae-caked vehicles whose presence I can't speak to, who've never known ownership, like lucky dogs living to implement themselves upon people pretending to remember being born. And fish, of course. And because the lake is acidic, it's a glass-bottom boat forgetting the physics of floating, a sense of self-making, a window out of roiling, churned-up water shenanigans whipped into a foam, a swan bevy becoming cannibal in smashed lace harassments, homesteading what, from a great height appears blue, but upon close inspection is a terrifying non-color. No, not white. Hives of migraine meadows held in the shape the shattered urn took on after I failed to fix it. I don't know how to talk about my biological father, so instead I'm going to describe the lake. It's blue with swans fortifying their shores by hissing at a forest embracing the lake, and suns escaping out of fear born out of anger, or anger born out of fear, pulled waterside by fires, lifeguards lit to ward off unwanted swimmers, asking what is a fist if not a ball of knuckles, a den of gaunt joints gripping in anticipation, curled and waiting. I don't know how to talk about my biological father, so instead I'm going to describe the lake by way of describing the trees that are part of the lake and that they are not the lake. They are green and make up a terrifying sharpness, murmuring when I walk through a bevy of their kind clustered like strangers, forced to stand together and practice the patience of being thrust about while protecting themselves with flattened palms, hissing sorry, sorry, sorry. I don't know how to talk about my biological father, so instead I'm going to talk about the lake, how sky-fed aquifers before subterranean catheters con swan water from a socket of shield, ogling stars frantically attempting to communicate by constellation, trying to ask for something that can never be provided, and all I can say is, oh look, a pattern. What does it mean to me, and can it make murder? Thank you very much.
What brilliant works by such talented writers. If any of you are listening in tonight, any of the finalists, you all deserve a huge pat on the back and a huge round of applause. We're thrilled to support all of your titles and, of course, your publishers and you. If you're interested in purchasing the chapbooks, you can, of course, go to the publisher's website. It's Gaspereau Press, Knifefork Book, Baseline Press, Above Ground Press, and Rahila's Ghost Press. So please go check out the publishers and support them. We also have wonderful volunteers posting links to the chapbooks in the chat to make it easier on you. And thanks again for watching and supporting, for everyone who's come out tonight.
And this does conclude our programming for this evening. So thank you so much for attending an H of a Net. If you want more small presses, more chapbooks, and more amazing writing, make sure to join us in Mississauga on November 4th for our Indie Lit Market, along with some of your favorite small presses from across Canada. Keep an eye out on our website and our social media. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram, where we'll be posting updates and more information. And again, congratulations to Baseline Press, Above Ground Press, Knifefork Book, Gaspereau Press, and Rahila's Ghost, as well as our 5 shortlisted authors, Jason Christie, Laboni Islam, James Lindsay, Cassidy McFadden, and Kitchen Goon. Your writing and talent deserve all the love and recognition.
Absolutely. One amendment to Urjani's statement, it is the platform formerly known as Twitter.
Right.
We want to thank everyone for coming out today and for supporting independent Canadian literature. We wouldn't be here without you. So thank you, everyone, and we hope you have a wonderful evening. Good night.
Yes, good night, everyone.